I watched my wife kiss another man like she used to kiss me. Through a rain-spotted windshield, 50 yards from a lakeside cabin I'd never seen before, I sat frozen in my truck while the woman I'd built 5 years of my life around pressed her body against someone else. His hands on her waist, her fingers in his hair. That smile, God, that smile I thought had died somewhere in our 4th year of marriage, alive and radiant for him. My chest felt like someone had reached inside and squeezed until the bones cracked. I'd suspected for months, the late nights, the phone always face down, the way she'd stopped looking at me like I mattered. But suspecting and seeing are 2 different kinds of pain. Suspicion is a slow poison, seeing is a blade straight through the sternum. I didn't confront them that day, didn't storm out of my truck and demand answers. I just sat there, hands shaking on the steering wheel, while the life I thought I knew collapsed into rubble around me. Before we go any further, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to know how far this story travels. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because tomorrow's story is one you shouldn't miss. My name is Graham Holloway. I'm 41 years old. I work as a wind turbine technician, spending half my weeks driving across the Great Plains, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, climbing 300-foot towers to keep those massive blades spinning. It's honest work, hard work, the kind that leaves your muscles aching and your mind clear. At least, it used to leave my mind clear, before I discovered that everything I'd been working toward was built on lies. I spent 5 years trying to be the husband and father a broken family needed. Meredith had been a single mother when we met, raising 2 kids alone after their biological father vanished like smoke. Her daughter Sophie was 4 years old the first time I saw her, shy, clinging to her mother's leg, watching the world with cautious eyes. Within a year, she was calling me Daddy, not because anyone asked her to, because that's what I became to her. Her brother Tyler was different. 11 years old when I entered the picture. He watched me like I was an intruder from day one, suspicious, resentful, waiting for me to fail the way his real father had. I told myself he'd come around eventually. Kids need time, right? What I discovered in those weeks after the cabin, the hidden apps, the secret accounts, the $52,000 she'd been draining from our savings, the messages spanning nearly 3 years, would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And Tyler, that 16-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and his absent father's contempt, he'd known all along, covered for her, lied to my face while I worked 70-hour weeks trying to build them a future. When I finally left, I didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't give either of them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I just vanished, quietly, completely, without a single goodbye. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why I left the way I did, you need to understand how it started, how I fell in love with a woman who would eventually betray me, how I became a father to children who weren't mine by blood, but felt like mine in every way that mattered. So let me take you back to a harvest festival in a small Kansas town, back to the night a little girl grabbed my hand and refused to let go. The autumn of 2018 smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke. I remember that detail specifically because I almost didn't go to the Harvest Festival that year. I'd been on the road for 6 straight days, servicing turbines outside Dodge City, and every muscle in my body screamed for my couch and a cold beer. But my buddy Marcus, one of the site supervisors, had been nagging me for weeks about getting out more, meeting people, living a life beyond work and sleep. So I went. Parked my truck in a muddy field outside the fairgrounds, walked past booths selling kettle corn and handmade quilts, and tried to remember what normal people did for fun. That's when I saw her.
Meredith was standing near the apple cider station, her dark hair pulled back in a messy braid, wearing a flannel jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. She was arguing with a young boy, maybe 11 or 12, who had his arms crossed and his jaw set in defiance. A little girl stood between them, clutching a stuffed rabbit and looking like she might cry. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the boy's voice carried. "I don't want to be here. This is stupid. I want to go home." "Tyler, we talked about this." Meredith's voice was tired but patient. "We're having a family night. 1 hour. That's all I'm asking." "This isn't a family," Tyler snapped. "It's just you pretending everything's fine when it's not." He stormed off toward the game booths, leaving Meredith standing there with her shoulders slumped. The little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, is Tyler mad at me?" "No, sweetheart. Tyler's just having a hard day." I should have walked past, should have minded my own business, but something about the exhaustion in that woman's voice, the weight she was clearly carrying alone, made me stop. "Cute rabbit," I said, nodding toward the stuffed animal. "Does he have a name?" The little girl studied me with enormous brown eyes, suspicious the way children are with strangers. Then, slowly, she held up the rabbit. "Mr. Buttons." "Mr. Buttons," I repeated seriously. "That's an excellent name, very distinguished." She almost smiled. Meredith looked at me then, really looked, and I saw gratitude flicker across her face. Gratitude just for the small kindness of making her daughter feel seen. "I'm Graham," I said, extending my hand. "Meredith." Her grip was firm, her palm warm. "And this is Sophie." We ended up walking the festival together. Meredith apologized for Tyler's behavior, explained that their father had walked out 2 years prior, that the kids were still adjusting, that some days were harder than others. She didn't say it looking for pity, just stated facts, the way people do when they've made peace with carrying heavy things alone. Somewhere between the pie-eating contest and the live bluegrass band, Sophie's hand found mine, small fingers wrapping around my calloused palm, holding on like she'd decided something important. Meredith noticed. I saw her eyes flick down to our joined hands, saw something shift in her expression. Hope, maybe? Or fear? Probably both. "She doesn't usually warm up to people," Meredith said quietly. "Kids know things," I replied. "They can tell when someone's safe." We exchanged numbers that night. Within 2 weeks, we were dating. Within 6 months, I'd fallen completely in love, not just with Meredith, but with the idea of being part of something bigger than myself. Sophie started calling me Daddy before our first anniversary. I should have paid more attention to Tyler's silence. We got married in the spring of 2019. Small ceremony, backyard of Meredith's rented farmhouse. Sophie was the flower girl, scattering petals with such concentration you'd think she was diffusing a bomb. Tyler stood in the back row, arms crossed, refusing to participate, but at least present. I told myself it was progress. For the first 3 years, I threw myself into that family like a man who'd been wandering the desert and finally found water. I coached Sophie's soccer team, helped Tyler with his homework, even when he rolled his eyes at every explanation. Fixed the leaky roof on the farmhouse, built a swing set in the backyard because Sophie had mentioned once, just once, that she wished she had one. I thought we were building something unbreakable. I was wrong. The shift started around our 4th anniversary, subtle at first, like a photograph slowly fading in sunlight. Meredith's smiles became less frequent, then perfunctory, then absent entirely. She started working late, supposedly covering for a coworker on maternity leave, but the overtime never seemed to end. Her phone became an extension of her body, always in her hand, always face down on the table, always on silent. "Who are you texting?" I asked one evening, keeping my voice light. "Just work stuff," she replied without looking up. "Boring scheduling things." I wanted to believe her, so I did. The intimacy between us didn't fade, it evaporated. We went from making love weekly to monthly to barely at all. When I tried to initiate anything, she was tired, stressed, not in the mood, had an early meeting, was getting a headache. After 6 months of excuses, I stopped trying. Have you ever felt like a stranger, sleeping with someone who used to feel like home? That's what my marriage became. 2 people occupying the same space, sharing the same bed, but living in entirely different worlds. I'd walk into a room and Meredith would barely acknowledge my presence. I'd ask about her day and receive one-word answers. I'd reach for her hand and feel her pull away, not dramatically, just enough that I got the message. I was furniture to her, present but invisible, convenient but unloved. Sophie noticed. She was 8 by then, old enough to sense tension even if she couldn't name it. "Daddy, how come Mommy doesn't laugh anymore?" We were sitting on the porch swing I'd built the summer before, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. The question hit me like a punch to the chest. "Mommy's just busy with work, sweetheart. Grown-up stuff. It'll get better." I wanted to believe that, too. Tyler, on the other hand, seemed almost satisfied by the growing distance between me and his mother. I'd catch him watching us sometimes, me reaching for Meredith, her stepping away, and there was something in his eyes that looked like triumph. At 16, he'd grown bolder in his disrespect. When I tried to enforce curfews or limit screen time, he'd snap back without hesitation. "You're not my father. You can't tell me what to do." Meredith never backed me up. If anything, she'd pull me aside later and suggest I was being too strict, too controlling, too demanding of a teenager who was just going through a phase. I started traveling more for work, volunteering for the distant jobs, the overnight assignments, anything to escape the coldness that had settled over our home like frost. I told myself I was imagining things, told myself marriages went through rough patches, told myself if I just worked harder, provided more, loved better, eventually she'd come back to me. But deep down, in that place where men know truths they don't want to admit, I felt it. Something was very, very wrong.
The breaking point came on a Thursday in early March. I was supposed to be in Oklahoma that week, servicing a cluster of turbines outside Tulsa. 3 days on site, 2 nights in a motel, the usual routine. But a freak ice storm rolled through and shut everything down. The client called to reschedule, and suddenly I had 3 unexpected days at home. I didn't tell Meredith. Not intentionally, I just figured I'd surprise her. Maybe take her to dinner at that Italian place she used to love. Try to reconnect. Try to remember why we'd chosen each other in the first place. I pulled into the driveway around 4 in the afternoon. Her car was already there, which surprised me since she rarely got home before 6 these days. Sophie would still be at her after-school program. Tyler was probably at a friend's house, doing whatever 16-year-olds do when they're avoiding home. I walked in through the side door, dropping my bag in the mudroom. The house was quiet, except for a sound coming from upstairs. Meredith's voice, muffled through the bedroom door, but clear enough that I could hear the tone. She was laughing. Not the polite, hollow laugh I'd grown used to. This was different, light, musical, the kind of laugh that comes from genuine joy, from being truly seen by another person. I hadn't heard that laugh in over 2 years. I climbed the stairs slowly, my work boots silent on the carpeted steps. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough that I could hear every word. "Stop it," Meredith was saying, her voice playful. "You're going to make me blush." A pause. She was on a video call. I could tell by the rhythm of conversation, the way she'd wait for responses I couldn't hear. "I know. I miss you too. So much it hurts sometimes." My hand found the wall, steadying myself as the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "This weekend won't work. Graham's supposed to be back Friday night, but next week he's got a job up in Nebraska. 4 days. We could have real time together." Another pause, then that laugh again, followed by words that drove a spike through my chest. "I love you too, Keith.
I'll call you tonight after everyone's asleep. Keith. The name meant nothing to me. I'd never heard it before, never seen it in her contacts, never encountered it in any context, but the way she said it, soft, intimate, like a prayer, told me everything I needed to know. I backed away from the door. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was certain she'd hear it. Every instinct screamed at me to burst through that door, to demand answers, to make her look me in the eye and explain how she could whisper love to another man while wearing my ring. But I didn't. Something held me back. Maybe it was the realization that confronting her now, with nothing but an overheard conversation, would only give her room to deny, deflect, gaslight me into questioning my own sanity. I'd seen her do it before, twist situations until Tyler's clear disrespect became my overreaction, until her late nights became my insecurity. I needed proof, undeniable, unrefutable proof. So I retreated, walked back downstairs on shaking legs, slipped out the side door, got in my truck, and sat in a parking lot 3 blocks away. I sat there for an hour, hands trembling on the steering wheel, replaying those words over and over. I love you too, Keith. That night, I came home at my usual time, pretending I'd just arrived from Oklahoma. Meredith greeted me with the same distant smile she always wore, asked about my trip, accepted my kiss on her cheek without really feeling it. I watched her all evening, the way she checked her phone under the table during dinner, the way she excused herself to take a bath and didn't emerge for 90 minutes, the way she turned away from me in bed, building a wall of pillows between us. For the first time, I saw everything clearly, and I began to plan.
4 days later, I followed my wife to another man. Meredith thought I was in Nebraska. I'd loaded my truck that Monday morning, kissed Sophie goodbye at the bus stop, and driven away like normal. But instead of heading north, I circled back through town and parked at a gas station with a clear view of the main road leading out of our neighborhood. I waited 2 hours. At 10:15, her silver Honda pulled out of our street and turned west, the opposite direction from her office downtown. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding, my palms slick on the steering wheel. She drove for 40 minutes, leaving the familiar roads behind, winding through rural routes I'd never traveled. Eventually, she turned onto a gravel path that cut through dense woodland, and I had to hang back further to avoid being spotted. The path ended at a lake I didn't know existed. Tucked into the trees sat a small cabin, weathered wood, green shutters, a porch overlooking the water. Meredith parked beside a black pickup truck that was already there. I pulled off the road 50 yards back, hidden by a cluster of oaks, and watched. A man stepped out of the cabin as she approached, tall, dark hair going gray at the temples, confident in the way he moved, like he owned every space he occupied. He opened his arms, and Meredith walked into them like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Then he kissed her. Not a friendly greeting, not a polite peck. He kissed her the way I used to kiss her, deep, hungry, passionate. Her hands went to his face, his to her waist, their bodies pressed together like they couldn't get close enough. She was smiling, that radiant, alive smile I thought had died years ago. I sat there gripping my steering wheel until my knuckles went white, my breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. Part of me wanted to storm out, confront them both, demand to know how long this had been happening and why I'd been such a fool. But I couldn't move. Watching your wife in another man's arms does something to you, breaks something fundamental inside that you didn't even know could break. Every memory we'd built, our wedding, Sophie's first day of school, quiet evenings on the porch swing, all of it felt poisoned now, rotten from the start. They disappeared inside the cabin together, his arm around her shoulders, her laughing at something he said. I sat there for another hour,
unable to drive away, unable to look away from the door that had swallowed my marriage whole. Sometimes the truth we're terrified to find is the same truth that finally sets us free. If you've ever wondered about signs you might be missing, staying subscribed might keep you aware of what hides in plain sight. When I finally left, I didn't go home. I drove to a dive bar on the edge of the county, ordered a whiskey I'd barely tasted, and sat in a dark corner trying to figure out what came next. The bartender, an older woman with kind eyes, refilled my glass without asking. "Rough day?" "You could say that." She nodded like she'd seen 100 men wearing my expression. "Whatever it is, don't make any decisions tonight. Nothing good comes from choices made at the bottom of a glass." Sounded ice. I wish I could take it. But as I sat there, the shock began to harden into something else. Not rage, that would come later. This was colder, more calculated, a quiet determination forming in my gut like steel cooling in a mold. I wasn't going to beg, wasn't going to plead for an explanation or a second chance, wasn't going to give Meredith the opportunity to manipulate me the way she'd been manipulating me for years. I was going to find out exactly how deep this went, and then I was going to leave on my own terms.
The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I returned home from my Nebraska trip wearing the same mask I'd worn for months. Dutiful husband, patient stepfather, oblivious fool. Every morning, I kissed Meredith goodbye and watched for signs of guilt that never appeared. Every evening, I sat across from her at dinner and marveled at how easily she lied. But behind that mask, I was methodically dismantling our marriage piece by piece. First, the finances. I logged into our joint accounts late one night while Meredith slept, scrolling through months of transactions I'd never examined closely. What I found made my stomach turn. Regular transfers to an external account I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, 300 here, 500 there, easy to overlook amid the normal chaos of household expenses, but they'd grown larger and more frequent over the past 18 months. 2,000 in November, 3,000 in January, 5,000 just last month. When I tallied everything up, the number stared back at me like an accusation. $52,000 gone. I took screenshots of every transaction, forwarded them to a private email account she didn't know existed, and saved backups on a thumb drive I hid in my truck. Then I found her second phone. It was tucked into a zippered pocket of her gym bag, the bag she carried everywhere but never seemed to use for actual exercise. A cheap, prepaid smartphone, the kind people buy when they don't want records. I waited until she was in the shower, then powered it on. The messaging app was right there on the home screen. Hundreds of messages, photos, voice notes, 3 years of conversations with a man named Keith Brennan. I scrolled through them with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The early messages were tentative, nostalgic, 2 old flames reconnecting after a decade apart. But they escalated quickly. Within weeks, they were making plans to meet. Within months, they were exchanging explicit photos. Within a year, they were talking about a future together. One message from 6 months ago made me physically ill. "Graham's so clueless. He travels constantly and barely notices when I'm gone. He's useful for paying bills and keeping Sophie entertained, but there's nothing there anymore. Never really was, if I'm honest. You're the one I should have married." Useful. That's what I was to her. A utility, a convenience. I photographed everything, every message, every photo, every damning word. Then I replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it and walked outside to vomit in the bushes. The final discovery came 2 days later. Tyler's laptop was open on the kitchen counter when I walked past. He'd gone to a friend's house, left in a hurry, and hadn't bothered closing his browser. I shouldn't have looked, I knew that, even then, but something made me glance at the screen. A conversation with Meredith on some family messaging app I didn't know existed. Is Graham still buying the Nebraska story?
Yeah, he's totally clueless. Just make sure Keith parks behind the cabin next time. Graham drove past our road last week. My stepson, the boy I'd coached, helped with homework, tried for 5 years to build a relationship with. He'd been covering for his mother all along, warning her, helping her hide. Would you have confronted her that night, or would you have done what I did, waited, gathered, and planned your exit in silence? Tell me in the comments. I closed the laptop and walked to the barn, stood there in the dark for an hour, breathing through the rage, forcing myself to think strategically instead of emotionally. I contacted a divorce attorney the next morning, a woman named Patricia Chen, based in Kansas City, far enough that word wouldn't travel back to Meredith through local gossip. The plan was in motion. All that remained was the execution.
I left on a Saturday afternoon in late April. Meredith had taken Sophie to a birthday party across town. Tyler was at a friend's house, or so he claimed, probably warning his mother about something, the way he always did. I had maybe 3 hours before anyone would notice I was gone. It was enough. I'd already packed what mattered. 1 duffel bag with clothes, essential documents, my laptop. A folder containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Screenshots, photographs, bank records, all of it backed up on 2 separate thumb drives. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The attorney, Patricia Chen, had been clear during our phone consultations. Kansas law doesn't require you to prove fault for divorce, she'd explained, but documentation of infidelity and financial misconduct strengthens your position significantly. Don't confront her, don't give her time to hide assets or spin narratives. When you're ready to leave, leave cleanly. Cleanly, that was the word I held on to as I walked through the house one final time. The kitchen, where I'd made pancakes every Sunday morning for 5 years. The living room, where Sophie and I had built pillow forts and watched cartoons. The backyard, where I'd installed that swing set she'd wanted so badly, spending an entire weekend getting the angles just right. Every room held ghosts of the man I'd been trying to be, the husband, the father, the fool. I stopped at Sophie's bedroom door. It was open just a crack, enough that I could see her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Buttons, older and more worn than when we'd met, sitting on her pillow. Her drawings were taped to the walls, crayon families with stick figure versions of all of us. In every picture, she'd written Daddy above the tall figure holding her hand. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. Walking away from Meredith was easy. She'd killed whatever love I had left the moment I saw her in another man's arms. Walking away from Sophie, from the little girl who'd grabbed my hand at a harvest festival and never really let go, that was something else entirely. But I couldn't stay. Staying meant dying slowly in a marriage built on lies. Staying meant teaching Sophie that love meant accepting betrayal. Staying meant losing myself completely in the effort to hold together something Meredith had shattered years ago. I pulled Sophie's bedroom door closed and walked downstairs. On the kitchen table, I placed 3 things: my house key, my wedding ring, and a single sheet of paper with 12 words written in careful handwriting. I know about Keith. I know about the money. We're done. No explanations, no accusations, no opportunity for her to twist reality until I questioned my own sanity. Just facts and finality. I walked out through the garage, got in my truck, and pulled out of the driveway for the last time. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. Quiet streets, manicured lawns, families going about their Saturday routines. None of them knew that a man was driving away from everything he'd built. None of them cared. I headed north. Not toward any particular destination, just away. Away from Kansas, away from the plains, away from every reminder of the life I'd tried so hard to construct. I drove for hours as the landscape changed around me. Flat farmland giving way to rolling hills, then forests, then lakes that glittered in the fading afternoon light. Somewhere around the Minnesota border, my phone started buzzing. Meredith. 17 missed calls, 11 text messages I didn't bother reading, 3 voicemails I deleted without listening. There was nothing she could say that would make me turn around, nothing that would undo what I knew. Then a text came through from a different number, Sophie's tablet, the one we'd gotten her for Christmas last year. "Daddy, where are you? Mommy is crying and Tyler says you're never coming back. Please come home. I love you." I pulled into a rest stop and sat there staring at those words until my vision blurred. The hardest part wasn't leaving Meredith. It was knowing that Sophie would wake up tomorrow in a house where I no longer existed, wondering what she'd done wrong, wondering why the man she called Daddy had vanished without saying goodbye. I typed a response with shaking fingers. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I love you very much, but I can't come back. Be good for your mom. You're the sweetest girl in the world." Then I blocked Meredith's number and kept driving north until the road ran out.
I ended up in northern Minnesota, in a small town called Pike Falls that I'd passed through once on a work trip years ago. Something about the place had stayed with me, the way the forest pressed in from all sides, the stillness of the lakes at dawn, the sense that a man could disappear here if he wanted to, and disappearing was exactly what I needed. I found a rental cabin on the outskirts of town, a simple structure with a wood stove, a small kitchen, and a porch overlooking a lake so calm it looked like glass. The owner, an elderly woman named Harriet, didn't ask questions when I paid 3 months up front in cash. She just handed me the keys and told me the firewood was stacked behind the shed. For the first week, I barely left that cabin. I slept, ate when I remembered to, stared at the lake for hours, watching the light change across its surface, trying to process what had happened. Some mornings I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for Meredith's warmth beside me before remembering she wasn't there, that she'd never really been there, not the woman I thought I knew anyway. The divorce paperwork arrived on day 9. Meredith had filed quickly, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me were her demands. Half my retirement account, spousal support for 4 years, continued health insurance for herself and both kids. She was overreaching, Patricia told me during a video call. I had documented infidelity, documented financial theft. We could fight most of it. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted it over. But I also wasn't going to let her take advantage of my exhaustion, so we negotiated back and forth while I built a new routine in Minnesota. That's when I met Walt. He was in his late 60s, weathered face, hands like leather from decades of outdoor work. A retired fishing guide who'd lived in Pike Falls his whole life, knew every inch of these lakes, every species of fish, every hidden cove where a man could cast a line and forget his troubles for a while. I encountered him at the general store one morning, both of us reaching for the same bag of coffee. We struck up a conversation that led to an invitation. He was heading out on the lake that afternoon. Did I want to join? I hadn't fished since I was a teenager, but something about Walt's easy manner made me say yes. We spent 4 hours on that lake, barely speaking, just casting lines and watching the water. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in months. "You've got that look," Walt said as we packed up the gear. "What look?" "The one that says a woman broke something inside you that you're not sure can be fixed." I didn't answer, didn't need to. Walt nodded like my silence confirmed everything. Had that look myself about 15 years back. Wife of 22 years decided she'd rather be with my business partner. Took half of everything and most of my dignity. "What did you do?" "Fell apart for a while, drank too much, felt sorry for myself. He secured the tackle box and looked out at the water. Then I realized something important. Surviving alone isn't the same as truly living. You can exist in isolation, nurse your wounds, build walls so high nobody can hurt you again. But that's not a life. That's just running out the clock. His words settled over me like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. How did you stop just surviving? Started letting people in again, slowly, carefully, found work that mattered, built friendships that didn't expect anything from me except showing up. These lakes helped. Nature has a way of reminding you that your problems, big as they feel, are pretty small in the grand scheme of things. Over the following weeks, Walt became something between a friend and a mentor. We'd fish together most mornings, share meals at the local diner, talk about everything and nothing. He never pushed me to share more than I was ready to share, just offered steady presence and occasional wisdom. One evening, sitting on my cabin porch watching the sunset, I told him the whole story. Meredith, Keith, the money, Tyler's betrayal, Sophie's message that still haunted me. Walt listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You did the right thing," he finally said. "Walking away when staying would have destroyed you. That takes more strength than most men have." "But then why does it still feel like failure?" "Because you loved those kids, especially the little one." He took a sip of his beer. "That pain doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It just means you have a good heart. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I sat with those words long after Walt headed home, watching stars emerge over the lake, feeling something in my chest begin to loosen. Maybe I wasn't a failure. Maybe I was just a man learning how to start over.
6 months into my new life, the past came looking for me. I was splitting firewood behind the cabin on a gray October morning when a car appeared on the gravel road. Not a vehicle I recognized, a rental sedan, out of place in this land of pickup trucks and SUVs. The door opened and Meredith stepped out. She looked different, thinner, older somehow, though only half a year had passed. Her hair was shorter, her eyes carrying shadows that hadn't been there before. She stood beside the car for a moment, just staring at me, before walking closer. "Hello, Graham." I set down the axe and wiped my hands on my jeans. "How did you find me?" "Tyler remembered you mentioning this area once. I hired someone to track you down from there." She glanced around at the cabin, the lake, the towering pines. "This is where you've been all this time? What do you want, Meredith?" She flinched at the coldness in my voice. The woman I'd married would have fired back with equal coldness, or twisted the conversation until I was the one apologizing. This version of her seemed smaller somehow, deflated. "I needed to see you," she said, "to talk, to explain." "There's nothing to explain. The divorce is nearly final. Everything's been settled through attorneys." "Not everything." Her eyes welled with tears. "Graham, I made a terrible mistake. Keith left me 2 months ago. The day I told him I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. After everything I gave up for him?" I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sympathy, not even surprise. Just a hollow emptiness where anger used to live. "I lost my job," she continued, stepping closer. "The affair violated company policy. Someone reported us. The house is going into foreclosure because I can't make the payments alone. Tyler's been acting out, and Sophie cries for you every night. She doesn't understand why you left." "I didn't abandon her. I left a marriage where I was being cheated on and stolen from. There's a difference, and using her to guilt me into coming back won't work." "I'm not using her. You are." My voice cut through her protest. "You used me for 5 years. I was useful, remember? That's what you told Keith. Good for paying bills and keeping Sophie entertained. Nothing more." Meredith's face went pale. She hadn't known I'd found those messages, hadn't realized how completely her deception had been exposed. "Please," she whispered, "I have nowhere else to turn." "That's not my problem anymore."
I picked up the axe and turned back toward the woodpile. You made your choices, now you're living with the consequences. I'm sorry things are hard for you, genuinely, but I'm not your safety net. We're done, permanently. I heard her crying behind me, but I didn't turn around. Couldn't afford to. If I looked at her tears, I might remember the woman I thought she was, might weaken, might make the catastrophic mistake of believing people who'd proven exactly who they were. Eventually, I heard the car door open and close, the engine starting, gravel crunching as she drove away. Only when the sound faded completely did I set down the axe and sit on the chopping block, hands trembling with adrenaline. Walt appeared around the corner of the cabin a few minutes later. He'd been fixing a loose board on the back deck and clearly heard everything. "You handled that well," he said, sitting beside me. "Did I?" "You set boundaries, didn't let her twist things, stood your ground." He handed me a bottle of water. "You'll probably try again. Send the kids, maybe, but you stay firm. You've earned your peace." I nodded, drinking the water, letting his words settle over me. He was right. I earned this peace, and I wasn't giving it up for anyone.
2 years passed. The cabin I'd rented became a home I purchased. 15 acres of pine forest and lakefront property that I bought from Harriet when she decided to move closer to her grandchildren in Wisconsin. I spent months renovating the place, replacing the old wood stove with something more efficient, expanding the porch, building a workshop in the back where I could work on small engines and furniture during the long winter months. Work had shifted, too. I'd built enough of a consulting reputation that I rarely needed to travel anymore, advising wind farm operators remotely, occasionally driving down to inspect sites when problems arose. The income was steadier. The hours were mine to control. But the biggest change came in the form of a woman named Claire. She owned the bookstore in Pike Falls, a cozy space with creaking floors and the smell of old paper. I'd wandered in one November afternoon looking for something to read during a snowstorm, and we'd ended up talking for 3 hours while the wind howled outside. Claire had her own scars, a first marriage that ended when her husband's gambling addiction surfaced, years of rebuilding her credit and her confidence. She understood what it meant to start over, understood that healing wasn't linear, understood that some wounds never fully close, they just stop bleeding. We took things slowly. Neither of us was interested in rushing into anything. But by the following spring, she was spending most nights at my place. And by summer, we were talking about building an addition so she'd have a proper reading room with windows facing the lake. It felt different than what I'd had with Meredith, quieter, more honest, built on truth rather than performance. The letter arrived in late August of the second year. Sophie's handwriting had improved. She was 11 now, her letters more confident, her words more articulate, but the feeling behind them was the same little girl who'd grabbed my hand at a harvest festival and never wanted to let go. "Dear Daddy, Mom says I shouldn't call you that anymore, but you'll always be my daddy in my heart. I hope you're happy wherever you are. I think about you every time I play soccer. Remember when you taught me how to dribble past defenders? I'm really good at it now. Tyler said he saw you once and that you looked peaceful. He says he's sorry for how he acted. I think he means it. I just wanted you to know that I don't blame you for leaving. I didn't understand before, but I'm older now. Mom made mistakes, big ones. You deserved better. I love you. I always will. Love, Sophie." I sat on the porch reading that letter as the sun set over the lake, tears streaming down my face for the first time in months. Not tears of grief this time. Something else. Release, maybe. Closure. Claire found me there an hour later, the letter still in my hands. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Yeah." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. "I think I finally am." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we watched the last light fade from the sky together.
Looking back, I understood why I'd quietly left after discovering my wife's affair. Some men might have stayed, might have fought for something already destroyed, might have sacrificed their dignity on the altar of keeping a broken family together. But I'd chosen myself. Chosen peace, chosen the possibility of something real over the certainty of continued pain. The lakes had healed me. Walt had shown me that surviving wasn't enough. Claire had proven that love built on honesty was worth waiting for. And Sophie's letter had reminded me that the people who truly love you will find their way back, in whatever form that takes. As darkness settled over Pike Falls, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace with my choices, and genuine hope for tomorrow. Have you ever lost everything you thought you wanted, only to realize it finally freed you to find what was real?